Breaking Barriers to Nature Access, and our first presenter is Kevin Debs. He's with Tiny Trees Preschool out of Seattle, and his topic is Nature So White. Would you please join us and break it down for us, Davin? Hold, Davin, go sit down, go sit down. Go sit down, Davin. Okay, now Davin came here all the way from Seattle to share his knowledge and to help us, and he's in our family. He's in our family, and he's going to break it down for us, and we got to show him more love than that. Davin, would you please come down? Davin! Yes, Davin, come on, man.
Oh my goodness, I feel the love. I feel it. It's right here. Oh my goodness. Hello. Hope everybody's doing well. Coming back from lunch, got some food in you. My name is Kevin Debs. I'm the Deputy Executive Director at Tiny Trees Preschool, based out of Seattle. We run multiple outdoor preschool class spaces in Seattle and the surrounding King County. And we have about 10 different class spaces right now. So we're serving between 150 and 200 families every day. So it's quite a big undertaking. And so I'll talk a little bit more about that program and how it relates to the work that we're doing. So the reason that I chose #NatureSoWhite was because a few years ago, there was someone named April Rain who coined the term Oscar So White, and she used it to really highlight the lack of diversity in film. And as a result, there were a lot of things that ended up changing. There were a lot of conversations that weren't being had before that ended up being had, and that was something that I found to be really aspiring as a cinephile myself. I love movies, and so that really resonated with me. And it also kind of made me think, like, I've been kind of a person who loves to exist outside ever since I was a kid. That's me. At 3 years old, I loved running around and getting dirty and climbing things. And my mom said that I wasn't really a super rowdy kid as much as I was like, ooh, shiny. And I would walk away. So anything that piqued my interest, I was always trying to explore and figure out and see what it was about. But I think that's a part of me that has just stayed and hasn't left. And it's that exploration and that wonder and that curiosity that has gotten me in trouble and sometimes, but also has really led to some really amazing opportunities. So, did I click the button? There we go. So as I got older, I started doing some more stuff, and I think my mom, I asked her recently, this was a picture of me and my best friend, we're still best friends to this day, at summer camp. And it was like my first sleepaway camp, and there was cabins, and we went on hikes, and I learned how to swim, and a dragonfly landed on my nose while I was floating. It was a great time, I loved it. And I asked my mom, and I was like, did I just kind of have this like propensity for outdoors and you were trying to cultivate that? And she was like, I don't know, I don't think so. She was like, I just wanted you to be a well-rounded human being. I wanted to give you as many opportunities to do different things as possible so that you knew what you liked and what you didn't like and what your connection to the world and to the environment was gonna be. And I was like, Mom, you're very thoughtful. That is my baby girl. I definitely put a picture in here to spam pictures of my daughter because I think she's the cutest, most amazing, wonderful person in the world. Her name is Forrest. Forrest May. She is 5.5 months, and y'all should send her some healing vibes. She's a little sick right now. So, but, you know, when I became a dad, all of, 6 months ago, one of the things that kept coming up for me and in my head is like, what world am I providing for her? What world, what is going to be her experience with nature? Because my wife and I are very excited about going outside and doing things. We took her snowshoeing at 2 months, right? So we're doing things and getting outside and having a lot of fun, and that's great, but there's a bigger reason for that, and it's around like ensuring that she has the opportunity to have these outdoor experiences in ways that in the beginning are going to be led by us, but as she gets older that are more meaningful to her. And so when she gets to be older and becomes an adult, she doesn't have to necessarily, love nature in the way that we do, but she will understand it and she will respect it. And that's kind of the goal. So yeah, also, I just love looking at her. I could stare at her all day. I love her little face. So what's the problem, right? Like, to start with the problems and then move on to the solutions, right? What are the things that we're talking about here? And the biggest thing that I've noticed in my studies and getting my master's degree and now working on my doctorate is that people of color historically have not been well represented in outdoor spaces. And so what ends up happening is that we build these narratives around what it means to exist outside. When I tell my family about my job, I have been working at Tiny Trees for 6 years, y'all. 6 years. And my parents are like, okay, but they're outside. It's cold outside. And it rains. What do you do when the weather gets bad? And I'm like, we put a lot of things in place. We have canopies. We have heaters, they have rain suits, they have boots. My dad's like, but they're gonna get colds. And I'm like, they're gonna get colds inside just as much as they're gonna get them outside, probably even more so because indoor spaces are cesspools and licensing requires you to sterilize everything. So there's really no opportunity for folks to like get the germs and build any immunity. And my dad was like, yeah, but they're outside. Like, okay. But it goes to a point of like, there has been a narrative around what it means to go outside. Like Black folks, we don't hike, we don't camp, we don't, do these things that have traditionally been, outdoorsy. And as we go along in the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about why, that term and what it means can be problematic as well. The other thing that we're talking about is like epigenetics. These are some of the reasons why. Epigenetics, intergenerational trauma or transmissions, and lack of representation, right? So epigenetics is the conversation around like our genetic makeup, right? Based on the experiences that our families have and that we have, right? It is actually baked into our DNA as we have experiences, and those things are wired and passed on to our other generations. Intergenerational trauma and transmissions comes around stories that are told and conversations that are had from one generation to the next. So for example, to use my dad, he worked on the railroad for 40 years, right, in Northern California and into Nevada. He spent his whole life outside, and that was work for him. And not only was it work for him, it was work for him in the 60s through a lot of places that were overtly racist to him. So his correlation with the outdoors is going to be different than mine. So he gives me a lot of warnings. He used to get so scared for me when I first started to realize how much I enjoyed being outside. And he would say, like, you've got to be careful. You can't just go any place and think you're okay, especially when you're going into these small mountain towns. I like to rock climb. So he's like, you're going into these spaces, you need to be aware of where you're going. And there's a lot of truth in that. And, at first I wasn't trying to hear it because, I was 21 and I thought, I'd learned it all, right? I'd figured it all out. 21, I was good. And as I got older, I started to realize that he clearly knew what he was talking about. And it's something that I have to take into consideration, but that's a story that was passed down from him to me. And I'm able to take that and use that. And when I'm having conversations with my daughter, or am I having conversations with other students, we can talk about what do you need to do when you're going into certain places? How do you prepare? And on one hand, that can be very upsetting. But on the other hand, it sets you up for safety, right? And making sure that you have a network and you understand what's going on. So epigenetics, I talked about it a little bit. It's like what you eat, where you live, who you interact with, when you sleep, how you exercise, aging. All of these things eventually cause chemical modifications around the genes that, that will turn those genes on or off over time. So this picture, I feel like I've seen in a lot of other places, but this goes to a deeper narrative. This is the conversation around manifest destiny. If you think about the way that this country was built, the way that it started, there were a bunch of folks who were already here, living, thriving, and then this whole colonial settler idea of where I can come in and I can put I can put a stake in the ground and say, I guess I'm hungry, I only had apple for lunch. I can put the stake in the ground and say, I declare this mine, right? There's so much that is fundamentally wrong and incorrect about that, but it's that idea of this is mine, I don't care who was here first, I'm taking it for myself, that caused the expansion westward and contributed to the genocide of a lot of folks, particularly Native folks, and then bringing slaves in to build a country, bringing in the Chinese to build the railroads, folks that were treated super unfairly and killed and hurt in a lot of ways. You discover and you build your country, you build your country on that. It doesn't go away, right? Those ideas and those narratives still exist around what it means to be an American and the way that we view it, and what it means to be, again, how we are outside, how we exist in outdoor spaces, right? So there's this very rugged, frontier-y, individualism, John Muir way of viewing the outdoors. Think about a national park and what that is and what that stands for, right? Think about, Davy Crockett with the raccoon hat on, and think about how buffalo were basically hunted to extinction, right? Just the ways that folks have treated the land. You have to live in some sort of equilibrium and synchronicity with the environment, and when you live outside of that, it corrects itself, and it's going to correct itself. We're seeing that with climate change. It doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to be here to see that correction. So making sure that we are changing the way that we approach these things is not only going to help us now, but it's going to help future generations. So what I wanted to get into next is some of the work that we do at Tiny Trees. So when we were founded, one of the big things that we wanted to do was make sure that we were providing access to the outdoors and everyone had outdoor preschool to be able to go to. What we did not do was invest in the community. We had a person who knew a lot of folks and was able to, shake a lot of hands and build a lot of contracts, and we were able to create Tiny Trees. There wasn't really much of a conversation about, okay, well, what parks should we do this in? What types of demographics are we going to be attracting with outdoor preschool, right? I don't know if any of you have been to Seattle, but it is a very white city. I think it's probably I think it's either the or one of the most whitest cities in the world, in the country. There are people of color there, but it is a very segregated space, right? So if we have a location in South Seattle where there happens to be more Black and brown folks, there should be Black and brown folks that work there at least, and there should be Black and brown children that are in that location. One of our locations that was the furthest south was overwhelmingly white, and I knew then we had a problem because we were not talking to people, we weren't figuring out what they needed, we weren't figuring out how they were existing in the outdoors, right? There's this idea that being outside has to be one thing, and that is the furthest thing from the truth. We are in nature right now, in this hotel room, sitting in these chairs, listening to this presentation. You are in nature. You are in your house, you are in nature. You are out of your house, you are in nature. If you're going to check the mail, if you're going to a park, if your children are playing on a playground, that is just as important and just as meaningful as climbing a mountain. That's just as meaningful as going on a hike, right? It doesn't matter how you exist, but we have to expand our definition of what nature means so that it's more inclusive for folks. And when we do that, people feel more represented, they see themselves, and they say, hey, I belong here. What I'm already doing is valid. I don't need to go to the nature. I'm in the nature already. I'm already here, and my everyday experiences and my everyday existence is super valid. So it was with that idea that we started the Redefining the Outdoors project, because we realized that preschool is great. Not everybody wants it. It's not culturally relevant for everyone, right? But if we say, hey, we're doing this thing at a park for an hour on a Saturday, come hang out, that fits a little bit better with some people's lives and their schedules. So the pictures that you see up here, one of them we did a nighttime scavenger hunt, which was a lot of fun. Someone earlier was talking about how scavenger hunts are great ways for folks to engage with the outdoors or with nature, and I couldn't agree more. This one was great. We did it in a church parking lot. We needed stuff like leaves and rocks, and there weren't that many, and so we had to go out and like find them, and then when the kids found them, we had them go re-hide the stuff so that other kids could go find it and bring it back. It ended up being a lot of fun. We made these little night lights with a tea light and a jar and a ribbon, and the kids were just running around looking for stuff at night. It was a lot of fun. The other picture, the second picture is a cookout that we did. And so we did it with the Danny Wu Community Garden, and that was multi-generational. We had young children, and then we had a senior citizens apartment, and they made wontons for our soup. We did like a stone soup thing, and everyone brought stuff. They were able to get things from the garden, and it was a whole lot of fun. Bike at Beacon was an event where we gave away about 30 or 40 bikes and helmets to children and their families in the neighborhood, and that was a lot of fun because every person that we talked to, we asked them, like, you know, where in Seattle do you live? And they were like, oh, we live in Beacon Hill, which is a very specific neighborhood. And for some reason that made me feel really happy because it felt super localized. It felt like this was something that we wanted to do in this park, you know, in particular, and we were able to do that, and the folks in this particular space were able to come and take advantage. One family left with a bike. Someone on the playground said, oh, that's a cool bike. And someone said, they're giving away bikes, go get one. And they came over and left with a bike. It was great, you know, so being able to create those experiences. We do gear giveaways. Every child that comes to Tiny Trees Preschool gets free gear with their, it's gear with their tuition. It's included in their tuition. And we also offer financial aid. But we do gear drives for families who aren't at Tiny Trees or families who want to switch out gear that doesn't fit anymore for bigger sizes, because I'm already learning kids grow really, really fast. So, yeah, those are just some of the examples of things that we've done, but we're really trying to, again, honor everyone's outdoor experience and how they like to be outside, because it's all important. It's all relevant. We all do it in different ways. And whether it's, you know, on the bigger, grander scale, or if it's on a very small scale of you sitting out on your porch drinking a beer, that's equally as important. So, yeah. So I'm gonna wrap up here in a little bit, but you know, as we leave, I just want you to think about some of your earliest memories and experiences with being outside. Were they positive? Were they negative? Were they neutral? How have they shaped you? How have they affected you? How have they molded your view of being outside? So maybe just kind of thinking about that as we continue to go through the conference even, right? And you're listening to different people present. That's a whole nother conversation that could be going on in your head. This one is about just representation in advertisements. And I know that there are a lot of organizations that are starting to change that and do better, but this is walking around in downtown Seattle, and most all of the things that I saw were some iteration of these two people doing these two certain things. And advertisement gets tricky because there's a line between representation and tokenism that we need to be aware of, and it's important to tell multiple stories and have different perspectives so that people are being seen when they are at an outdoor research or they're at a Mountain Hardwear. So in thinking about gaining new perspective, and thinking about working with communities, because this work has to be community-based. You cannot do it. I love the quote earlier today, if you're leading and no one's following, you're just walking in a park. I should get that tattooed somewhere. I love that so much. but it's very real, right? So the first question is, does your space have images that present counter narratives about being outdoors? When you're working with kids and working with children and adults, wherever your space is, you have to make sure that we're presenting different ideas. Or if you hear a stereotype about what it means to be outside, call it out. Ask a question about it. Stereotypes tend to manifest as surprise. If you feel yourself feeling surprised, stop yourself and say, why did that surprise me? And just have that dialogue. These conversations are not always comfortable, so be prepared to be uneasy. You're gonna feel defensive sometimes when people bring things up, like work through that in a space that's not where you are, and then come back and try to figure out what was you being defensive and what is like general concerns or questions, and keep doing that. When you're doing any kind of outdoor activity, ask who is this excluding? Who are you leaving out? Who are you not thinking about? And how can you add other folks in? So again, everybody gets the opportunity to participate in a way that feels comfortable to them. Do some research when you're talking to folks. See what already exists. We don't have to do listening sessions every 10 seconds if folks have already given the information. So do your research, talk to folks, see what's going on, figure out less about how can we partner and ask more, what do you need that I can provide, right? If you come from a place of service of like, we don't need to be the big shiny thing. A lot of times when we work with organizations at Tiny Trees, we're not partnering and putting events on, we're letting them use our canopies. We're letting them use like our physical things. We're letting them use our space for the day, right? It doesn't necessarily need to be this big sexy thing. Sometimes it's the simple, mundane, everyday thing that an organization needs that you might be able to have that you can help with. So think about who, doing your research. You're gonna fuck up, okay? This isn't easy work, all right? Like, we're going to make mistakes. And the important thing about making the mistake is that you own the mistake, you apologize, and then you move on and do better, right? Like, if you suck less next time. It's a way to live, right? Don't waste your apology tour on people that you've hurt or offended, because that's more emotional labor for them, right? Work with community. I already said that. Ask what the barriers are. Listen. Use the information for co-creation and not just what you think is a good idea, right? Respect the spirit of the place. You need to learn the indigenous history of your space. You should know who was there first. If folks can remember the name of the park, they can remember who was there before that was named that park. It was probably named after some old dead white guy anyway, right? And last but not least, get your staff into anti-racism training as soon as humanly possible, followed by whatever DEI training you need. And there is a difference between anti-racism and DEI, and I highly, highly encourage anyone who is working with anybody to go through anti-racism training so you can figure out where those barriers are, how you're operating. It helps you communicate better. We all want to communicate better, right? Especially in a time of a pandemic where we haven't really been able to communicate in the ways that we're used to, and we're coming back out, and I'm like super awkward. I don't know about y'all, but I'm like, hi, hey, I forgot how to talk. So it really helps with that, and then your DEI training will really, really be something that, again, helps you expand your learning. So with that, thank you very much. Keep in touch.